Hello crafters, this is Yana Smakula for SimonsSaysSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana episode. In this video, I have a masculine Valentine's Day card to share created with some new goodies from Simon. All supplies I'm using for this project are listed and linked in the video description below for your convenience. If you are looking for a link to a particular product I'm using today, you can check there. I'm also going to give you a quick rundown of the supplies I'm using. First up is the Loving Sun and Moon Cling stamp set. It is one of those sets where you can pop the individual images out, and I will be using just the moon from here. I love the size of this moon and the way it is illustrated. It is perfect to take center stage on a card. For my sentiment, I'm going to use the new So Much Love stamp set, and I'm going with the Love You to the Moon and Back sentiment. Next, I'll be using Simon's Soft Navy Cardstock. I love this color with the Scattered Stars stencil, palette knife, and Glitz gel in color citrine. We'll also need a small white jelly roll pen, some brass or antique gold embossing powder, black or pearlescent black cardstock. Pearlescent looks better, I think, but you can also use regular black and spray it with a shimmer spray to give it that beautiful, subtle shine. And lastly, we will need the Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated ink pad in color Royal. This is the look at the finished card. I feel this is a great masculine design for Valentine's Day, and it's not hard to make. Let's jump right in. I'm going to start by heat embossing the sentiment on the Soft Navy cardstock panel. I know I'll need to leave some room for the moon, and I will only use the moon itself. I won't be using the trim around it. So that will make my moon a little bit smaller, but still pretty large for the front of my card, and I am making an A2 card. I'm going to position the sentiment to the right of the moon and heat emboss it in brass embossing powder using my mini MISTI stamping tool. I've prepped the paper with anti-static powder. I inked the stamps with clear embossing ink. I added the brass embossing powder on top. This is brass from Hero Arts, but other similar colors would work just as nicely. I know that Simon Says Stamp antique gold embossing powder would work just as beautifully here. And then I heat set the powder to melt it using my heat tool. And the sentiment portion of our card is done. We need to do some more heat embossing. We need to heat emboss the moon. I used black pearlescent paper for my original card, but I'm also going to show you how you can use regular black cardstock if you don't have the pearl paper in your stash. The black pearl paper has been discontinued and I just have little scraps in my stash, so I thought it would be best to show you how to achieve that faux pearlescent look using regular black cardstock. I repeated all of the steps to heat emboss an image, and I embossed it in the same brass embossing powder on regular black cardstock. This is Simon Says Stamp Black. Next, to give my moon some shine, I'm going to use a shimmer spray from my stash. I have the brushed pewter spray from Ranger, and I think it is going to give me that beautiful pearlescent shine. Whenever you use a shimmer spray, it doesn't matter what brand. If you're using a shimmer spray, make sure to shake the bottle first and then give your paper a few generous spritz of the spray and then set it aside to dry. While the moon is drying, let's go back to our sentiment panel. We need to remove the anti-static powder, and I like to use a pencil eraser for this. It cleans up that powder nicely. Next, I want to add interest to the background, and I wanted to have color variation and even some texture, faux texture. I can do that with the help of an ink pad and direct-to-paper technique. I'm going to use a shade darker ink pad and drag some ink directly onto the paper, leaving visible marks. I'm holding the ink pad at an angle, using just the edge of the pad to apply the ink to the paper. I can press down a bit harder in some areas to have more ink transferred to the paper, or I can just lightly drag the ink pad across the paper. I'm being very gentle here. I don't want to rip the foam on my ink pad. So best to start with a very light hand, and if you feel you're not getting enough ink, increase the pressure to transfer more ink onto the paper. I love this technique. It allows me to easily transform a solid piece of cardstock into a beautiful abstract background, and I can get different pattern every time. No two backgrounds are ever the same. Now, if you get some ink onto that heat embossed sentiment, you can wipe it off. You can wet the towel lightly to wipe the ink. The ink does clean up with water, so you can be sure it will not color your embossed sentiment. Where there's a moon, you always have stars, and I'm going to add a couple of stars onto the background using a stencil and glitter gel. So the blue abstract background signifies a night sky here. We've added some abstract strokes to the background to create variations in color in our night sky, and now we just need to add some stars. Now, this is a full background stencil, but I want to add just a handful of stars, scattering them around the moon. And I'm using the palette knife very carefully to apply the glitter just to select areas of my background. If you want, you can mask the several portions of this stencil to make it easier, or you can just use a smaller palette knife to make the gel application very precise. The glitter gel will need a couple of minutes to dry, so make sure to set your background aside. It doesn't take long. 10 minutes should be more than enough unless you've applied a very thick layer of gel. And that's why I love this gel so much. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to dry. I'm very impatient and I can't wait for several hours for something to dry when I'm making a card. I want it to be dry right away so that I can keep working. Also, remember to wash your stencil and your palette knife right away. Now the moon is now completely dry and I can cut it out for my card. I'm cutting it right up to the edge, as close to the gold embossing as possible, but not cutting into the heat embossing. This image is fairly easy to cut out, especially if you leave out the trim. Now, the paper curled a bit from all of the heat and all of the moisture, and I need a way to flatten it. I also want to pop the moon up on my card, and to do both of these things, I'm going to use a piece of black fun foam. If you don't have black foam, you can use white fun foam and color its edge using a black marker. We want to use black fun foam, or if you have a dark blue fun foam, so that the foam is not visible from the side of the card. Now I need to cut the foam to the shape of the moon, and to do that I found that I can press the stamp into the foam and that will leave a slight impression. Now I could have stamped the moon on the foam in white ink, but I didn't want to do that. So I just pressed the stamp into the foam, and that gave me a good enough impression to use as a guide to cut the moon shape out. If you are cutting it from white fun foam, you can just stamp your moon in black, and that will make an easy guide. Now I did cut this piece slightly smaller as I didn't want any of the foam to be visible under my moon. Next, I used barely art glue, and I adhered the moon onto the fun foam piece and onto the background. I placed a few clear blocks on top to apply pressure and let the glue set. Next, I have an A2 white card base, and I adhered 2 panels of scrap white cardstock to the base. Now, I did that to help me flatten the background. The blue panel did warp a little bit from the heat embossing, and I needed a way to keep it as flat as possible on my card. If I adhered the panel to the card base directly, it would not have been as flat as I would have liked. It would still have a little bit of warping. Adding these 2 sheets of scrap cardstock helped to keep the front of the card as flat as possible. And lastly, we need to add some white detail. I like to draw white dots in between the gold stars to add interest to the card. I scatter the dots between the stars and also between the letters of the sentiment, connecting the 2 star clusters. I'm using Sakura Jelly Roll white pen in size 0.5. I hope you give this idea a try. If you make a card inspired by this video, we'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always enjoy seeing what you make. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.